The fall of Jerusalem, fractured brotherhood. Shalom, shalom, family. It's your brother Benaiah Ben Israel coming to you with a video of the history of the fall of Jerusalem. If you're new to the faith, or if you're new to your awakening as to who you are, one of the key critical histories that every single man, woman, and child should know is the history of the fall of Jerusalem, the fall of our great city. Now, in this video, what we're going to do, we're going to review what the children of Israel were doing just before Rome invaded Judah or Judea, and also what they were doing during the invasion, and also how the city of Jerusalem finally fell to the Romans. All right, so let's start off by reading some prophecies that had to do with the fall of Jerusalem. And for that, we're going to start off with Luke chapter 21, and let's start with verse 10. So Luke chapter 21, verses 10 through 28, and it reads, and this is the Messiah prophesying. He says, then said he unto them, nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines and pestilences, and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. But before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into the prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And it shall turn to you for a testimony. Settle it, therefore, in your hearts, not to meditate before what you shall answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. And you shall be betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinsfolks and friends. Some of you shall they cause to be put to death. And you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. But there shall not be a hair of your head perish. In your patience possess you your souls. And when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee into the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. Now, just to pause just for a moment. Now, note that the people that the Messiah was prophesying about were the people of Judah. Now, let's keep going. It says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword. In verse 24, it says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, or led away into slavery into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now let's pause here on verse 24. Just take note of a couple of things. Now, first thing we notice in verse 24 is that the children of Judah would be led away captive into all nations. And one of the things I try to point out to family and friends and folks that I try to we try to awaken to the truth, and I'm sure many of you have tried to do the same thing. But we notice that these people have gone into this captivity into all nations. And what I ask people is that, now what other people on the face of the earth has gone into slavery into all nations? It's only one people. It's only one people. And then the other thing that we notice is that the prophecy is that Jerusalem, like the city of Jerusalem, shall be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So that also tells us that from when, we know that in 70 AD, it was the Romans that came and sacked Jerusalem. So that tells us that from the time that the Romans sacked Jerusalem, that the Gentiles will be troddening down Jerusalem from that time until their time is up. All right, from that time until the time is up. So that's why this event is a key moment in history. It is a very important moment in history for not just the children of Israel or the children of Judah, but actually for the whole world. But let's keep reading, because I want to see if we can read all the way down to 28, because what we're noticing is that we're reading down in chronological order, right? So as we look back in history, we know that this part, verse 24, has already taken place. We know that the children of Judah have already been scattered to the four corners of the earth. We know that the children of Judah have participated or unwillingly participated in this thing called the transatlantic slave trade, and also the Arab slave trade. Both slaveries were used to scatter the Most High Yah's chosen people to the four corners of the earth. And so we know that has already taken place. But let's read verse 24 to see what else was prophesied that either have or have not come to pass. So in verse 25, it says, "And there shall be signs in heaven and in the moon and in the stars and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring." Verse 26, "Men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory." Verse 28, "And when these things shall begin to come to pass, then look up and lift your heads, for your redemption draws nigh." All right. Hallelujah. Praise the Most High Abba Yah. All right. Hallelujah. So we know that verse 28 has not come to pass yet. We know that verse 27 has not come to pass yet. The Messiah has not returned yet, but that is something, an event that we are looking forward to with great anticipation, because it is associated with our redemption. And so we can say that from between verses 24, so verses 24 has to do with the captivity, and verses 28 or 27 has to do with the coming of the Messiah. We know that as far as time is concerned, that we are in between verse 24 and verse 27. We're between the verse 24 and 27 as far as prophecy is concerned. And so you can see that we are close, Israel. We are close to the end of days. We are close to the redemption and the returning of our Hamashiach, of our Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. All right. Hallelujah. Praise the Most High Abba Yah. All right. And then another verse that I do want to read. Let's see. I actually don't have it up on the screen here. I believe it was, let's see. I believe it's Luke 19. And let me see if I can find it here. Hopefully I can find it. Verse 41. Yeah, verse 41. All right. Luke chapter 19, verse 41. And it reads, and we're just going to read about the Messiah, because he's also going to prophesy a bit about Jerusalem. And it says, verse 41, and it reads, "And when he was come near, he beheld the city." This is referring to the city of Jerusalem, "and wept over it, saying, If thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto your peace. But now they are hid from your eyes. For the days shall come upon thee, that your enemies shall cast a trench about you, and compass thee round about, and keep thee on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and the children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. So we can see that the Messiah, he's weeping and he's looking at Jerusalem and he's prophesying. He's prophesying that a trench will be made around Israel and that it would be dug up. It would be laid even to the ground, and that not one stone would be laid upon another. And Yah willing, in this history lesson, what we're going to see is that that actually did come to pass. And we're going to look at that. We're going to look at some maps of that as well. All right. So first things first, now that we've read some of the prophecies, we know what to expect. I like to go into the description of Judah at the time. All right. Because, there's some confusion as to what Judah looked like at the time. And that has to do with some imposters that are running around today. But let's do this. So there's a couple of historians that were around, around 70 AD, right, around this time frame. One, of course, is Josephus, and we're actually going to read quite a bit about Josephus. And the other is Tacitus. So Tacitus is a Roman historian, and he too writes about the description of the children of Israel, or the children of Judah. And what Tacitus does is that he writes about 70 AD, and then as he's writing about it, he goes into talking about the different ideas as far as like, where did Israel come from? Like, what's the ethnic origin of the children of Israel? And one of the ideas that people had was, and I have it highlighted on the screen, it reads, many again say that they are or were a race of Ethiopian origin. So in other words, the thought was that Israel originated from Ethiopia, that they originated from Ethiopia, who in the time of King Cephas, they were driven by fear and hatred. All right. So Tacitus shows us that even back during the time of the fall of Jerusalem, that some believe that the children of Judah were of an Ethiopian origin. So, of course, it kind of goes without saying, if people believe that they were of Ethiopian origin, then they looked African. They do have more references. So I'm just going to show you just a quick reference. This reference comes from 1859. And hopefully you can see the reference there on your screen. And in this one, we're going to drop all the way down to the bottom where it reads, there are some Jews still lingering in the valleys of the Jordan, having been approached by the successive conquerors of Syria for ages, a low race of people, and described by trustworthy travelers as being as black as any of the Ethiopian races. All right. So I just wanted to show you that Tacitus wasn't the only one that believed that the children of Judah, or the children of Israel, were a race of Ethiopian origin, or that they looked like Ethiopian people. And then, I've used this reference in a couple of different videos, but this is just the Lachish relief. It's a picture of the Lachish relief. I believe it's in the London Museum. And this is a relief. If you have Bible, if you get time, take a look at 2 Kings 18:13. And basically what happened was that Assyrians, King Sennacherib comes into Judah's territory. So remember, Israel was separated into two kingdoms. There's the north side, and then there's the south side. So northern kingdom, southern kingdom. The southern kingdom, or what I refer to as the south side, that's where Judah lived, right? It was called Judea. So that's where Judah lived. And in the south side, Jerusalem was in the south side, and also there were other cities in the south side. One of those cities, one of the names of the cities was Lachish. But King Sennacherib, the Syrian king, comes down and he's making war against Judah. On his way to Jerusalem, he stops at Lachish, the city of Lachish, the city of the kings, and he lays siege to it, and he destroys it, breaks down the walls, takes prisoners. He kills many of our brothers and sisters. And then to commemorate, his victory, when he goes back home, they make this Assyrian relief, or this stone carving depicting what happened. And within this relief, he shows the Israelites. And this is what you see on your screen. These are the Israelites that were captured by King Sennacherib. And as you can see, just looking at the hair texture alone, you can see that these are Ethiopian type people. They have what I refer to as nappy woolly hair, same as the Ethiopian people. All right. So just another bit of evidence of archaeology showing that the children of Israel, they were people that looked like a people of Ethiopian descent. And that's just one thing to keep in mind, that as we're going through this history, I want you to have in your mind the people of Harlem or the Bronx would most closely resemble people that were in Jerusalem during this time. All right. So just looking at this, I just want you to have in mind of what the people of Judah looked like as they were walking up and down the streets in Jerusalem. As they're walking up and down the streets in Jerusalem, there were people that looked like the people are on your screen. Next slide. Since we're getting ready to talk about the fall of Jerusalem, just going to show you just a couple of different paintings of what the city of Jerusalem looked like, right? And these are just a couple of different depictions. I believe this painting comes from the 1100s, and you can see there, it may be hard to see. You know, there's a lot of colors there. It looks like there's, in this painting, there's the city is actually being, just to give you an idea of what different artists depicted the city attacked, our homeland, to look like. And this is another depiction. Now, this painting comes from, I want to say the 1500s. So around the 15 or 1400s, this too was a depiction of Jerusalem, picture or a painting of Jerusalem. But the most important thing, and what we're going to do, is that we're going to take a close look at the layout of Jerusalem. Now, I know you may not be able to see the layout in this old picture, but one of the newer pictures of Jerusalem. All right. So there it is on your screen, the layout of Jerusalem. And some people, and what I tell folks is that if you want to have an idea of what Jerusalem looked like, just think of a sandal, right? So think of like if someone had on sandals and they were walking through the sand and then they left some footprints behind. This is kind of sort of what that looks like. You know, maybe not a perfect picture of a sandal, but nonetheless, you know, it kind of sort of looks like a sandal, which is interesting because, you know, there's scriptures out there that talks about the earth being the Most High Yah's footstool, like he puts his foot on the earth. And here we have Jerusalem, the capital city. It almost looks like the picture of a footprint of a sandal, which is very interesting. But the thing that I want you to take a look at, and I know you may not be able to see my mouse on the screen, but if you start off to the left, right, you start off to the left, this is where the Romans came into the city. You know, they started from the bottom left, came into this courtyard area, or this area off to the left, and then from there they moved over to the right. Right. Some of this, as we're going through the video, and I actually want to skip over this slide before we get into the breaching of the walls, you know, where the Romans were and what places that they went to in order to destroy and raise the city and destroy the city. Let's take some time to just go into the background of Jerusalem. You know, what happened in 70 AD to get the ball rolling as far as, you know, Jerusalem being destroyed. Well, on your screen, we're going to read just a little bit of that. So where it says background on the left, it says, in the year 6th century, Judea, remember the south side of Israel. So on the south side of Israel, which had been a client kingdom of Rome, became a Roman province ruled by a Roman procurator who was responsible for maintaining peace and collecting taxes. So basically, Rome was ruling Jerusalem. So Rome had put a proctor or person, a Roman person, in charge of Jerusalem. And so he was collecting taxes. You know, he was supposed to be maintaining peace, but something happened. And so it looks, and if you keep reading, it says, you know, this guy, he was pocketing any amount above the quota. You know, it had been a regular practice. So he was taking money from the children of Judah. It says, which led to abuse. It says tension rose when Rome took over the appointment of the high priest. So strike one, Rome started assigning the high priest for Israel. So that was strike one. So, but let's keep reading, because a few other things happened which caused problems for the people of Israel and which caused them to react. Then that is what caused Rome to react. So Rome did strike one. They assigned a high priest. And then it says in 39 CE, it says Emperor Caligula declared himself a god and ordered his statue to be set up in temples throughout the empire. So strike two. So Rome put this Caesar Borgia looking guy, his painting or his depiction in the temple, right? They put it in the temple. That was strike two. And then let's read what else happened. Let's read about strike three. Okay. And it reads, it says, so there was a city called Caesarea, and it was actually in Syria, which is interesting because right now in Syria, there's a whole lot of drama going on in Syria with Kurds and ISIS. They're fighting over Syria, but in reality, that's really that's really our land. What caused the issue in 70 AD had to do with Caesarea, right? And it says the Jews and the Syrians concerning Caesarea, which was situated in the confines of Syria and Judea. It says the Jews maintained that the city belonged to them because it was built by Herod, their king, while the Syrians pretended that it had always been considered as a Grecian city. So basically you have the Jews on one side saying, oh, no, this is our city. And then you had the Syrians saying, no, this is our city, right? So it went back and forth. There was tension. Folks were, each side was they were arming themselves. So what they did was that they sent the matter to Rome. They sent it to the emperor to plead their case. And something happens. It says the affair hung in suspense till this period when Emperor Nero, decided it against the Jews. So basically, Emperor Nero said that, no, you know what? This city belongs to Syria. Well, that was strike three. By this time, our people had had enough. And as it reads, it says, this event was the immediate cause of the fatal war with the Romans. So that's why our forefathers started the event or the war with the Romans. Because one, they messed with the high priest. They started assigning the high priest. Two, they put this Caesar Borgia depiction dude in the temple, and they said you had to worship it. And then three, they took away the city of Caesarea and said it belonged to the Syrians. So at that point, our people had had enough, and they started fighting with the Romans, right? And it says the fatal war with the Romans, which proved the most desperate of any record in history. It says, and terminated in the destruction of Jerusalem. It says the decree of the emperor was no sooner published than the Jews in all parts of the country took up arms. All right. So now what you're seeing is that you're seeing what caused it all, what kicked things off, so to speak. But there's a guy that was around during that time, and his name was Josephus, and you may be familiar with him. Josephus was he's a historian that a lot of people quote when it comes to trying to recount history. But Josephus was around during that time, but you may not know that Josephus, he was a priest and of a considerable rank, but he was also a governor. So when all this kicked off, Josephus was a governor. He was a governor of the two Galilees, right? And also what happened, Emperor Nero, he sends his General Vespasian, he was a general in his 50s, to go and squash this resurrection that was occurring in Israel. So Vespasian comes, he sends his General Vespasian. So Vespasian is coming, and as Vespasian, he's coming through, he's making his way methodically through Israel. It's not as though he came directly to Jerusalem. No, he came into Israel and he methodically started destroying one city after another, one village after another. And as he's doing this, he eventually comes to the cities or the territory where Josephus is. So Josephus, at this point, he's fighting. I say that he's fighting for the blue team. He's on the Israel side, right? Vespasian, he wins, or he, destroys the place where Josephus was. But Josephus, he actually escapes, and it says Josephus was among the prisoners, and it actually tells us how he became a prisoner. It says he had escaped the general massacre by flying from the midst of his enemies, and with 40 of his bravest men concealed himself in a deep cavern. His retreat was discovered to Vespasian. So Josephus goes and he hides. He's hiding with his men. Vespasian, finds him and discovers him, but it says that the famous general sent to offer him life upon honorable conditions. So basically, Vespasian decided not to kill him. He gave him an option, right? He gave him an option. And so actually, Josephus was going to take him up on the offer. But unfortunately, the men they rebuked Josephus for it. They said they would rather die in order to surrender to the Romans. So what they decided to do, they took a death pact. And they took a death pact. They decided to kill themselves. And to do it, they drew lots, right? Kind of like drawing straws nowadays. And so as the men are drawing lots, one after the other, they're killing themselves, or they're killing one another. And as they're going through this process, it comes down to two men, Josephus and one of the other men. And I can kind of imagine that at this point, Josephus kind of came up with an idea. He was like, brother, I have another idea. Instead of us killing each other, let's go and talk to Vespasian. Let's go over to Vespasian. And needless to say, that's exactly what happens, is in that Josephus goes over to Vespasian. And of course, from there, he's a prisoner of the Romans, right? He's a prisoner of the Romans. And actually Josephus plays a role in, how can I put it? Josephus plays a role in the events to come. Okay, we know what happened. What kicked things off, we know that Vespasian is on his way over to Jerusalem, but he's methodically making his way to Jerusalem. And as he's making his way, destroying cities, destroying towns, killing lots and lots of the children of Israel, he picks up Josephus along the way. So now Josephus is in his camp as a prisoner. Something else happens. I call it the three amigos. So we have, when all this ruckus, within Israel started, we have these people that today we refer to them as zealots. So they were the ones that were fighting against the Romans. And within the zealots, three factions were created. So three groups were created in these zealots. One of the groups was headed by John. One was manned by Simon, and the other by Eleazar, right? And these three factions fought against each other, right? They were actually killed and murdered each other, as far as the men in these factions. And these factions, eventually they made their way into Jerusalem, where they continued their civil war, right? All the while Vespasian is making his way through Israel to Jerusalem, where these three factions, just kind of pause here for a moment. And this is where we can really learn about division within Israel. Because as the Romans were advancing, Israel was fighting against one another. These three zealots, these three groups, John, Simon, and Eleazar, they were fighting against each other. And let's read about it, because actually the Romans saw that and they took advantage of it. So it says, after the conquest of Galilee, Galilee was where Josephus was. So after they destroyed Galilee, picked up Josephus, it says, by the reduction and gas the city, says Titus joined his father. So now Titus is joining the party. So Titus is the son of Vespasian, and he joins them at Caesarea, where his troops were permitted to enjoy an interval of repose. So they took a pause during the remainder of this and in the following year. All right, so they're pausing for a moment. And it says, the Roman Empire prevented Vespasian from pursuing the war in vigor. He says, he the more readily deferred commencing the siege of Jerusalem from being a prize, that the Jews were wasting their strength by internal divisions and facilitating the conquest of their devout city. So basically, Vespasian, he hears about this civil war that's occurring in Jerusalem, and he's willing to let them just go at it, like let them destroy each other, right? So they're waiting, and they're watching these factions fight each other. And some of the things that's happening inside the city is, in the city they have these provisions, right? And some of the factions are burning their provisions, right? Because they want to starve. One side wants to starve the other out. So one side gets a hold of the provisions in Jerusalem, and so they start destroying those and burning up their food, right? Which they're going to need. They're going to need that when the Romans show up. But they're too busy fighting each other that they're not preparing. They're not working together. They're not fortifying their walls. They're not building towers, none of that. They're fighting each other. Our next slide, and it says, at a time when a formidable army was rapidly advancing, the Jews were assembling from all parts to keep the Passover. All right. So another important part was that this was during Passover. As the Romans, as Vespasian and Titus now, who joined his father, as they were approaching Jerusalem, all the Hebrews, or all the, the Israelites, were coming into Jerusalem from all over, these different countries, right? So we had well over 1 million Jews or Hebrews or Israelites in Jerusalem to observe the Passover. We had more than enough people in Jerusalem to defend the city, but they were too busy fighting, right? They were too busy fighting. And also another thing to keep in mind is that, so this is Passover, this is a Moed, right? This is an appointed time, this is an appointed feast day, right? When the Most High visits his people, right? And what you're going to see is the Romans, who don't believe, they don't believe in the Most High, they don't believe in the Elohim of Israel, they actually see something that they note in their books. And this is actually noted in multiple sources, and we're going to read it. So far, we learned that, strike one, it took Rome, assigned a high priest. Strike two, they put that Caesar Borgia guy in the temple, a picture of him. Strike three, they took away the city of Caesarea. So that started the big fight. Emperor Nero, he sends Vespasian to go and squash it, right? And then as Vespasian's going through the cities, he comes to Galilee. He destroys Galilee. He takes Josephus as a prisoner. Meanwhile, in Israel, we have those three factions fighting amongst each other, having a civil war. They take that into Jerusalem, and where they are still fighting each other, they're burning up the provisions. They're doing the opposite of preparing for this massive army that's coming to destroy everybody. They're coming to destroy everybody. But Israel, they're too busy fighting amongst each other. All right. So now that we've set that stage, one of the things that the people of Israel in Jerusalem believed that the Most High had his hedge of protection around the city. So they thought that there's no way that these heathens are going to be able to conquer this city. There's no way that the Romans would be able to conquer it, because they had the protection of the Most High Yah. Well, let's take a look at the scriptures that deal with the hedge, right? This hedge. So for that, let's jump over to the book of Isaiah. So let's go to Isaiah and chapter 5. So Isaiah chapter 5, and on the screen there you can see it says verses 1 through 13. So Isaiah chapter 5, verse 1 through 13, and it reads, "Now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved has a vineyard in a very fruitful hill, and he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof and planted it in the choicest vines, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress therein, and he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, between me and my vineyard. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes. And now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard." Uh-oh. So this is what the Most High is saying that he's going to do to his own vineyard. And it says, "I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. And I will lay it waste, and it shall not be pruned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns, and I will also command the clouds that they rain no more, or no rain upon it. For the vineyard of Yah of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, but behold, oppression, for righteousness. But behold, a cry." Verse 8, "Woe unto them that join house to house, that lay field to field, till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. And mine ears, saith Yah of hosts, of a truth many houses shall be desolate, even great and fair, without an habitation. Yea, 10 acres of vineyard shall yield one bath, and the seed of an omer shall yield an ephah." Verse 11, "Woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, and that they may follow strong drink, that continue until night, till wine inflame them. verse 12. And the harp and the viol and the tabret and pipe and wine are in their feast, but they regard not the work of Yah, neither consider the operations of his hands. And then last but not least, verse 13, it says, therefore my people are gone into captivity, because they have no knowledge, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude drieth up with thirst. All right. Well, there's a precept for knowledge, and knowledge is actually the word of the Most High. So this is actually saying that they don't have knowledge. They don't have the word of the Most High. But he's telling them that he's taken away the hedge. And as you can see in Isaiah 5, that the hedge gets taken away. And then in verse 13, it says, therefore my people are going into captivity. So it was the Most High that took away the hedge, right? The hedge was taken away, and the people captivity. All right. So, and this is what happened. As we said, that this was during the time of Passover, and this was during a moed, during an appointed time when the Most High come in to visit his people. And it's interesting because during this time, the Romans saw something. So as they're approaching the city, as they came to the city, they saw something, during this time of Passover. And we're going to read about it. And it says at the very last paragraph, and it says, prodigies or strange occurrences had occurred, which this nation, prone to superstition by halting all religious rites, did not deem it lawful to expatiate by offering any sacrifice. All right, let's keep reading. It says, there had been seen hosts joining battle in the skies, the fiery gleam of arms, the temple illuminated by a sudden radiance from the clouds. The doors of the inner shrine were suddenly thrown open, and a voice of more than a mortal tone was heard to cry that the gods were departing. At the same instant, there was a mighty stir as of departure. Some few put a fearful meaning on these events, but in the most there was a firm persuasion that in the ancient records of their priests was contained a prediction of how at this time the East was to grow powerful and the rulers coming from Judea, right? So basically, Rome was there during the, this time of Passover, this time of visitation of the Most High. They're seeing these odd things occur in the sky, right? They're seeing swords in the sky. They're seeing light in the sky. They're seeing the temple, radiation of light lighting the temple, right? And then they're seeing something depart, right? They're seeing something depart, right? It's saying the gods or the Elohims were departing, right? So this is taking place just before the Romans came to sack the city. And actually, this had to take place before the Romans sacked the city. The hedge had to be removed, right? And let's see here. Let's go to, I want to read about where it says, Josephus, among other fearful prodigies, odd things, relates that before the rebellion, when a great multitude were assembled in Jerusalem at the Passover, at the Moed, right? The appointed time of visitation. So he said, Josephus, remember, he's there. He's seeing it for himself. So he's saying at the Passover, and he's being very specific, at the 9th hour of the night. So great a light shone round the altar and the temple that it seemed to be bright day. That a few days after the festival, before sunset, chariots and troops of soldiers in armor were seen passing through the clouds and surrounding cities, and that the priests going into the inner temple felt the place and trembled and heard a voice more than human crying, "Let us depart hence." This account was confirmed by Tacitus, the Roman historian, who says, so Tacitus, remember, Tacitus was there around the time that says, portents and prodigies, or odd things, announced the ruin of Jerusalem. Swords were seen glittering in the air, and battled armies appeared, and the temple was illuminated by a stream of light that issued from the heavens. The portal flew open, and a voice more than human announced, the immediate departure of the Elohims. There was heard at the same time a terrific sound, as if superior beings were actually rushing forth. So just before the Rome showed up at the doorstep of Jerusalem, the presence of the Most High that was there during Passover, that they left. It left, right? And everybody's, they're writing about it. It says both the Romans and the children of Israel are taking note of it. And the Romans, they're looking at this as a sign that Jerusalem's getting ready to fall. And even people in Israel saw it as a sign that something bad was about to happen. All right. So let's keep reading. So we still have, Vespasian. Vespasian's, he's there. He actually hands off the assault to his son Titus, because Vespasian eventually was made emperor. All right. So Vespasian actually goes back to Rome. So Titus is there to actually do the dirty work of destroying Jerusalem. And it says, the sight of the Romans produced a temporary reconciliation among the contending factions. So all this time, the factions were fighting with each other, right? It started off with three factions. We had John, Simon, and Eleazar. And actually, I believe it was John's faction actually conquers or destroys Eleazar's faction. So there ended up just being two factions left. You had John's faction and you had Simon's factions, right? But they were still fighting. They weren't preparing. They weren't fortifying the walls. They weren't putting up their towers, gathering food in, gathering water, none of that stuff. And actually, they were doing the opposite. They were fighting each other. They were destroying the people that were inside. They were destroying their provisions, right? And they didn't stop fighting each other until they actually saw the Romans standing at their doorstep, Israel. I'll say it again. They didn't stop fighting each other. They were too busy fighting one another, Israel, and not getting prepared for the larger enemy. Right? They weren't getting prepared for the greater enemy. But, they stopped for a minute, and it says their first sally was accordingly made with such fury and resolution that, though Titus displayed uncommon valor on this occasion, the besiegers were obliged to abandon their camp. So basically, Rome came up, Rome showed up, Titus was there. Titus and his army, they attacked Jerusalem. The factions pause, they work together, and they go out and they meet Titus's army, and they actually repel them. So Titus's army, they actually have to retreat. So they're running, and they retreat for a while to a certain distance. But then it says, no sooner had the Jews a short interval of quiet from the foreign enemies than their civil disorders renewed. So basically, once the Jews had repelled Titus the first time, then they started back fighting with each other. They weren't fortifying the walls. They weren't putting up towers, gathering water, bringing provisions in. They were too busy fighting each other, right? Not realizing what the most important thing was, right? The most important thing was getting ready for the greater enemy outside, as opposed to fighting each other, right? The most important thing is getting ready for what's to come, as opposed to worrying about doctrine. They had lost sight of that, Israel. They had lost sight of that. Let's see what else happened. So they're fighting. They went back to fighting each other. And let's see what Titus is doing. He says, the Romans, in the meantime, exert all their energy in making preparations for a powerful attack upon Jerusalem. Trees were cut down, houses were leveled, rocks cleft asunder, and valleys filled up. Towers were raised and battering rams erected, with other engines of destruction against the devout city. So you can see that the Romans, they were about that business. The Romans were getting ready to bring the pain to Jerusalem. But again, the people in Jerusalem, they weren't preparing. They were fighting. And keep reading. It says, after the offers of peace, which Titus had repeatedly sent by Josephus. So one thing I can say about Titus. Now, Titus, he tried to give the people in Jerusalem a chance, multiple chances. So he kept sending. So Josephus, who he took, when he conquered Galilee, so he took Josephus and he said, hey, Josephus, go and talk to your people. Go and see if they'll surrender. And of course, the zealots that were inside the city, John and Simon, they would not let the people do that. In fact, they told them the opposite, right? And it says the strenuous attacks of the enemy again united the contending parties within the wall. So basically, it says basically what it's saying is that those two factions that are fighting each other, they didn't stop fighting each other until Rome started attacking. Rome started throwing their boulders, their siege weapons, putting their battering rams, and they said, you know what, let's go and take care of these Romans. Let's go and fight these Romans. But by then, Israel, it was too late, because by then, Rome was prepared. Rome had taken advantage of that time and to make a powerful attack, right? They had their tools of destruction. Israel did not. Of Jerusalem began. And it says the rebels were soon compelled to retire from the ponderous stones. So Rome's throwing their stones that they had opportunity to get while the factions were fighting each other. It says, which they threw from the towers. And just to kind of skip down a little bit, it says a breach was soon made in it, right? A breach was made in the wall, at which the Romans entered and encamped in the city while the Jews retreated behind the second wall. So I don't know if you guys ever watched Lord of the Rings. Basically, when Rome breached the city, I'm just going to scroll down a bit on this map. So on the bottom left, you'll see this is where Titus was, that square. And so Rome breached the city. That's the wall that Titus breached as he's coming into the city, right? And so this is the first enclosure that Rome enters, and you can see where it says the second wall, right? That's the second wall. And so, all right, so what happened for Rome to allow Rome to get across this second wall? Let's keep reading. So here's just another picture. And so on the bottom left, I don't have the arrows on here, but on the bottom left, Rome breached that first wall, and they were in the enclosure on the left, right? And then they started attacking the second wall, which is to the right. And here's a picture with arrows. Again, you can see them coming in on the left, getting into the first enclosure, and then trying to breach the second wall to get to the second enclosure. And it says the victors immediately advanced to the second wall and applied their engines and battering rams so furiously that one of the towers they had erected began to shake. And the Jews who occupied it perceived their impending ruin, set it on fire. So the Jews, they were in this tower and it was shaking, so they panicked and they set it on fire. But what happened was that tower fell across the wall. It fell across the second wall. It says the fall of this structure gave the Romans entrance into the second enclosure. So when that tower fell, it fell across the second wall, and which allowed the Romans to then come into the second wall. And at first, they were pushed back by the children of Israel, our forefathers that were in that second enclosure. But after a while, the Romans gained a foothold in the second enclosure. So Israel had to retreat behind the third and the inner wall. So there were multiple walls in Jerusalem. All right. So Titus he's making progress. He's actually inside. But again, let's say in Josephus, he's a historian. He's taking note. He's fully involved. He's trying to reach out to his brothers and sisters for them to surrender, to give up, to save the city, to save the temple. And it says Josephus, who was an eyewitness of the unparalleled sufferings of the Jews experienced during the siege of their metropolis, remarks, all the calamities that ever befell any nation since the beginning of the world were inferior to the miseries of his countrymen at this awful period. Right. So Josephus is seeing all this suffering. And one thing we're not really going into is the death that's occurring. There's a lot of death that's occurring. So as the armies are advancing, they're burning, they're maiming, they're killing as they go. And some of these references talks about the blood running down the streets like a river. But again, Titus, he's still trying to give the people in Jerusalem a chance. He's giving them multiple chances to surrender. And as Titus, after he breached the first wall, he breached the second wall. It says Titus, who was apprised of their wretched condition, because remember, those two factions, they were burning up their provisions. At one point, another of the factions of the zealots they locked away the provisions, and so that the rest of Israel couldn't get to those provisions. So some of the provisions were burned, some of them were locked away and kept from the people. But Titus, he sees all this happen and he stopped the siege for 4 days. Titus is looking across and he's seeing the children of Israel, the children of Judah, like they're starving. And as to kind of persuade them to give up, he starts handing out food in front of the wall. Right? He's handing out food, imploring the people to give up. Say, hey, give up. Get some food. At least you'll be able to save your city. We may not kill all of you. Who knows exactly what the conditions were. But Titus, he gave them a choice. And Josephus was again sent over and over again. And at the very bottom, it says he exhorted them in the most pathetic terms to save themselves, their temple and their country, right? Wouldn't allow it to happen. And it says the Jews were forcibly seized by the Romans without the walls. It just talks about all that death and destruction that we spoke about earlier. And how when the Romans killed them, they put them on crosses, and they were killing so many of our people per day. Like over 500 people were being killed a day, and that they were erecting these crosses. It says famine made them so daring in these excursions that 500 and sometimes more suffered this dreadful day. And on the day, on account of the number, Josephus observed that place was wanted they were crucifying them on crosses. Over 500 a day. And I guess if you had to get a picture of what that looked like in the back of your mind, you could think of like a farm, like a cornfield. Like if you're looking over a cornfield and you have all those cornfields, right? That's what it looked like. It was so many crosses, it almost looked like a cornfield of death, right? And so it wasn't until after Rome gained entry past the second wall, that's when they decided to put a trench around the city, right? And it says they undertook the arduous task of enclosing the city with a strong wall in order to prevent the inhabitants from receiving succor from the adjacent country or eluding his vengeance by fight. Let's see how long this wall was. It says, such was the preserving spirit of the soldiers that in 3 days they enclosed the city by a wall nearly 5 miles in circuit. So that shows you that there had to be a lot of Roman soldiers in order to put up a wall in 3 days, 5 miles. Let's go back to our maps because I want to show you where the wall is, right? Where this wall or this enclosure that was created. So it's shown on the map in red. So this wall that you see in red is what was created to encircle the last remaining people. 2 says a siege wall is erected around the city to prevent escape. And that was done in early July, right? And just to show you, give you an idea of what that wall looked like, via pictures here. All right, about 5 miles long. While all this is happening, these zealots, and I got to tell you, these zealots, from reading the references, they are wicked men because they killed a lot of their own people. They were killing women and children and wreaking all kinds of havoc inside the city of Jerusalem. But another wicked thing that they did was, in order to, keep the people fighting, they pretended to have prophets, literally paid prophets, paid guys, priests to prophesy to the false prophecies to the people. And you can see it here. It says, by hiring a set of wretches, pretenders to prophesy, to go about the city and declare the near approach of a speedy and miraculous deliverance. So these zealots had these preachers or these prophets, fake prophets, go around the city saying, oh, I prophesy victory for you, brother. The Most High is going to deliver us. And then let's read about, because we're actually getting close to the end. Like if this was a video game, all the lives would be lost and the health of the last man on the board would be getting ready to fade away. So it's just about game over for Israel, just about game over for the people in Jerusalem. And let's read about the final moments. And it says, they scaled the inner wall and after a sanguinary encounter made themselves masters of the fortress of Antonia. Still, however, not only the zealous, but many of the people were yet so blinded that though nothing was now left but the temple, and the Romans were making formidable preparation to batter it down. All right, so the temple had a wall of his own. So Rome, they got past that inner wall, And so now the only thing that's left is the temple. So you had some people, actually you had the temple, and to the right was the city, place where other houses and stuff were located. But they're now in the inner part. They're at the temple. They're trying to batter these fortifications down in order to get to the temple. But what they're finding out is that the fortifications around the temple, they're strong. They can't, there's no movement, those fortifications, right? We read, it says, and the Romans were making formidable preparations to batter it down. They could not persuade themselves that Elohim would suffer that holy place to be taken by heathens, right? They just couldn't, it didn't compute with them, right? I mean, think about it. They just saw this departure of Elohim's from the temple. So surely supernatural power of Elohim that just departed, surely that he wouldn't allow that these heathens to come and desecrate and destroy the temple. Surely that would happen. So that's what was the belief of the children of Israel, that they were barricading themselves in the temple. And it says, when Josephus was sent for the last time to John. So even in this late hour, even after he pretty much has Israel beat, he pretty much has Jerusalem captured. He's already inside the city. He's still trying to give them a chance to surrender. But John, he's one of those zealots, right? He's one of the men, these wicked men that was leading this uprising based off of his actions as far as what he did. He says, who commanded it in the temple. He's sending Josephus over to John to see if they would surrender. Short answer is no. So what happens? And just a quick note here says, on the 17th of July, the daily sacrifice ceased for the first time since its restoration by Judas Maccabees. So if you're familiar with the book of Maccabees, how during Maccabees, they reestablished the sacrifices at the temple when they retook Jerusalem back over. What this reference is saying is that, so sacrifices continued from the time of the Maccabees up until 70 AD. This is when it stopped. And it says the daily sacrifice ceased for the first time since its restoration, right? And you can see that it says at the very bottom, it says the Roman commander had determined in council not to burn the temple. So even the Roman commander did not want to burn the temple, but they weren't giving him a choice. And you'll see that I'll actually start at the top off where it says, but as the strength of the wall eluded the force of all his engines. So basically the wall around the temple, it wasn't budging. They weren't going to breach that. And it says his troops next endeavored to scale it. So they tried to climb it. They were repulsed. So they couldn't get past it with considerable loss. So they were losing men left and right as they were trying to scale this wall in order to get to the temple. It says when Titus found that his desire of saving the sacred building was likely to cost many lives, he set fire to the gates of the outer temple, which being plated with silver, it burnt all night. And the flame rapidly communicated or spread to the adjacent galleries and other things. And says Titus, who was still desirous of preserving the temple, caused the flames to be extinguished. All right, put it out, put it out. I don't want to destroy the temple. And it says, and appeased the clamors of his troops, who vehemently insisted on the necessity of razing it to the ground. So notice here that the people that Titus is commanding, that's causing all this death and destruction, his troops, basically, it was his troops that insisted on raising the temple to the ground. In other words, they insisted on digging this temple up. And we're going to actually read about this in scripture, because this points to, we can actually find out who these people are that are insisting that this temple be raised to the ground. And what you'll find is that it is a people that hate the Most High Yah, that they are the enemies of the children of Israel, right? They're the enemies of the children of Israel. So Titus, for a moment, he gets these troops of his that were insisting on raising the temple to the ground or burning it up. It says the uttermost exertions of Titus to save the temple were, however, ineffectual. And it says our Savior had foretold its total destruction. So it was prophecy had to be fulfilled one way or another. And his awful prediction was about to be accomplished. And now, says Josephus, the fatal day approached in the revolution of ages, the 10th of August, emphatically called the Day of Vengeance, in which the first temple had been destroyed by the king of Babylon. So on the same day that the first temple was destroyed by the king of Babylon, the second temple, or the temple during 70 AD, was destroyed on the same day. And this is how it happened. So while Titus was reposing himself in his pavilion, so while Titus, he's taking a break, he's relaxing in his pavilion, a Roman soldier. Remember, Titus had some Roman soldiers that were, they really wanted to burn this temple to the ground. All right. So this is kind of like the scene out of a movie where you just have this lone soldier, and he's walking towards the temple. Without receiving any command, he sees some of the blazing material, and with the assistance of another soldier who raised him from the ground, he threw them through a window into one of the apartments that surrounded the sanctuary. And basically what happens is that the temple starts going up in flames. So Titus, he's kind of relaxing. He hears all this commotion. So it says, Titus, being awakened by the outcry, hastened to the spot and commanded his soldiers to exert themselves to the utmost to extinguish the fire. So this wasn't Titus that was doing this. This was the soldiers Titus were commanding that did this, that wanted to raise the temple to the ground. I'm stressing that because it's a specific people that did this. And it says, he called, urged, threatened his men, but so great was the clamor and tumult that his entreaties and menaces were alike disregarded. The exasperated Romans resorted thither from the camp, or killing the Jews. So basically, temples going up, the soldiers, they're killing folks left and right. They're killing our forefathers left and right. It says the dead were heaped about the altar, and a stream of blood flowed at its steps. Still, as the flames had not reached the inner part of the temple, as Titus with some of his chief officers entered into the sanctuary in the most holy place, which excited his astonishment and admiration. After having in vain repeated his attempts to prevent its destruction, he saved the golden candlestick, the table of showbread, the altar of perfumes, which were all of pure gold, and the volume of the law, wrapped up in a golden tissue. And upon his leaving the sacred place, some other soldiers set fire to it. So you can see those same soldiers then made their way into the inner place where Titus was, and they started burning that. Titus, he was able to take things out of the inner temple. And even this is in Italy, and on there they depict the things that were taken out of the temple during this time. So they're also confirming what happened, all this stuff that they were able to take out of the temple. It says the conquerors carried their fury to such a height as to massacre all they met without distinction of age, sex, or quality. They also burnt all the treasure houses containing vast quantities of money, plate, and the richest furniture. In a word, they continued to work their progress with fire and sword till they had destroyed all except 2 of the temple gates. Okay, so after all this death and destruction was going on, John and Simon somehow still managed to survive, right? After all these people that are getting killed left and right, and John and Simon, they were the ones that would not surrender, that they wanted to fight to the bitter end. Then they decide to reach out to Titus and say, hey, Titus, can we talk about, surrendering to you? So, of course, by then, Titus, he was going to have none of it. And it reads, the conquest of Jerusalem being now completed, the Romans placed their ensigns upon the walls with triumph. They next walked the streets with swords in their hands and killed all they met. Amidst the darkness of that awful night, fire was set to the remaining divisions of the city, and Jerusalem, wrapped in flames and bleeding on every side, sunk into utter ruin and destruction. And of how many people were killed, it says the number of those destroyed during the war, which lasted 7 years, is computed to have been 1,462,000. When the sword had returned to his scabbard for want of objects, it says, Titus commanded the whole city and the temple to be demolished. All right. And upon viewing the strength of the works, he exclaimed, "We have fought with the assistance of God. It was God who drove the Jews out of these fortifications. For what can the hands of man or the force of machines effect against these towers. So basically, as Titus is leaving, he's looking back, looking around, and he was like, it was God that did this. Because he was looking at the towers. He was like, there's no way that a man could conquer this city. There was no way that could happen. And of course, the key part, the civil war, the strife, the beef, the fighting amongst Israel, which caused that to happen. But just before we close this out, let's take a look, because, you know, I tried to stress that there was a people that participated in the destruction of Jerusalem, that they were most vehement as far as, you know, razing the temple, destroying the temple, and killing people and cutting them off as they were trying to escape. There was a certain people that did this, and we can actually find this in the scriptures as we first take a look at Psalms chapter 137, and we're going to start at verse 1, and it reads, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there they that carried us away captive required us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of those songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Yah's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. Remember, O Yah, the children of Edom, in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof. So now we can see who it was that was shouting, raise it, burn it down, dig it up, even to this very foundation. It was Edom. And it says, then it also calls Edom, it says, verse 8, O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed. Happy shall he be that rewarded thee, as thou hast rewarded us. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. We're learning that it was Edom or Esau that causing all this death and destruction, that in the army of Titus. So you see Titus, you know, at times he wanted to save the temple. He wanted to save Jerusalem. He wanted them to surrender. But there were people that was with him, that was with his army, that kept pushing for this destruction. All right. And as we see, it says, and this is from the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 10. And it says, for thy violence against thy brother Jacob. This is talking about Edom or Esau. It says, for thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, and in the day that strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates. It says, and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou was as one of them. But thou shouldst not have looked on the day of thy brother, and the day that he became a stranger, neither should thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Neither should thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Thou shouldst not have entered into the gates of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldst not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the days of their calamity. Neither should thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. That's one thing I didn't read in the references, but it is actually in these books that there were soldiers that were standing guarding the streets that were cutting off people's escape. So we see in the book of Obadiah that it was Esau, that it was Edom that was in the guarding the cities, and that was cutting off the escape of the Most High Yah's people, because they wanted to destroy the children of Judah. And let's read verse 14 again. It says, neither should thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. Neither should thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. For the day of Yah is near upon all the heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thy own head. So one thing to keep in mind, that the Most High Yah has not forgotten. The Most High Yah will recompense, will pay back those that done this destruction. And we can see that Esau or a role in that. And we can even see this like in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 51, verse 6. And it reads, Flee out of the midst of Babylon and deliver every man his soul. Be not cut off in her iniquity. For this is the time of Yah's vengeance. He will render unto her a recompense. Babylon has been a golden cup in Yah's hand that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunk of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her, take balm for her pain, if so be she may be healed. Verse 9, we would have healed Babylon, but she was not healed. Forsake her, and let us go every one into his own country. For her judgment reaches unto heaven, and is lifted up even to the skies. Verse 10, Yah has brought forth our righteousness. Come and let us declare in Zion the work of Yah our Elohim. Verse 11, make bright the arrows, gather the shields. Yah has raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes for his device against Babylon to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of Yah, the vengeance of his temple.